Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're delighted to have this returning guest every Tuesday for the weekly market update. Andy Schectman is the CEO of Miles Franklin Precious Metals. He's joining us this Tuesday, December 12th, 2023. Andy, thanks for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
Wouldn't miss it. Good to be back. Done again.
Well, we've got a rather provocative title on this, and that is Nobody Expects What's Coming, or Nobody's Prepared for What's Coming. Our focus on preparedness for the past 10 years since we started our channel under the name Reluctant Preppers was about being ready for the things that are likely to cause disruption to our family's well-being and our family's financial futures and our liberty. A lot of things are in play right now, a lot of things affecting loss of privacy, loss of our financial well-being, the destruction of our purchasing power, earnings, savings, retirements. People are very concerned about that, and it seems that we're playing a chess game against an unknown opponent. It certainly seems clear to most people that those in power do not have the interests of ordinary people at heart. So that if anybody's going to be watching out for their family's best interest, it's not going to be their elected representatives in Washington or, heaven forbid, at unelected international bodies. But you've been watching closely a lot of trends and a lot of forward movement that most people don't even have any idea are happening. And you've been informing us about it so long that since people have been saying first, what is Andy talking about? And then, oh, it's the same old, same old. And now suddenly the things that you've warned us about are playing out week by week, month by month, quarter by quarter. So if we could kind of roll back the clock and let you remind those who are returning visitors and inform those who are first-time guests and all those who are watching us here on YouTube. If you want to get on the live stream chat and ask questions of Andy Schectman, make sure you're subscribed to Liberty and Finance. You got to click the subscribe button, then you can enter the live chat and ask questions. We're going to get to viewers' questions in a little bit, but Andy, I'm going to let you tee it off with that major topic of what is it that people aren't prepared for, that most people don't even know they should be preparing for.
Yeah, and I'm going to apologize for the lack of audio quality tonight. And again, when you asked me to do this, I had already commitments, but wanted to pivot for you. So I apologize if the audio isn't as good. I'm not at home this evening. I'm at a friend's house doing this.
Well, we like the artwork anyway, so.
Yeah, it's I'm always happy to pivot. You always are kind enough to do that for me. No, I think that, look, it's interesting too, because the people that have been watching your channel are prepared, and you can't get out of the way of what you don't see coming. And well, you know, that mentality is upsetting people like Al Gore, who says that because of social media, the democracy is under threat because citizens are no longer getting all the same news, the propaganda, and that algorithms that governments can't control are threatening democracy. So he wants to get rid of you and me and our ability to talk to people about what's happening. It's crazy. Look, the things, what makes it so frightening, if you will, to me, are the things that I have talked about are coming true. And I've been doing this long enough to, you know, to say that most of the stuff we've talked about have come true, but never when we thought they would. And that's the truth. And it's because you use mathematics, you use economics, you sprinkle in some old school logic, and you'll find that the things you talk about typically will come true, especially as they relate to mathematics, but never in the time frame. And going out on a limb, doing YouTubes starting almost 4 years ago, was something that was new to me, and saying things that I believed in that really weren't talked about or conventional wisdom, were things that I took heat for. Same old, saying the same thing over and over again, etc. And I'm okay with that. But what's concerned me more than anything, truthfully, as a father, as an American, is the speed at which these things are unfolding. And I don't take joy in being right. That actually frightens me more than anything else. And, you know, we've talked a lot about, obviously, my whole thing goes back to, you know, the reclassification of gold as a tier 1 asset. And I talked a lot about that when we first started talking. The gold's tier 1, and the central banks not only are buying it, but are repatriating it. And what have we seen over the last 2 years? These same central banks, and even an expanding list of them, are accumulating more gold and silver than at any time in the history of central banking. And I would tell you that not only are these central banks the wealthiest people in the world, obviously, but they're also the most well-informed. And when you realize that they know the script, they know the playbook, they're always 2 steps ahead of the public, look, the fact that gold was reclassified the world's only other tier one reserve asset in 2019 by the Bank of International Settlements, which has gotten no press by anyone but us conspiratorialists. And the fact that I harped on that for a very long time is something people should understand. I mean, why, after almost 70 plus years, would the BIS say gold's tier one? Why not special drawing rights by the IMF or another currency? But to choose gold, to me, caught my attention. And then to see the central banks remove counterparty risk by repatriating their gold from the Bank of England and the New York Fed, which would be the COMEX and the LBMA for convenience sake for these countries to trade and whatnot. They said, no, we'd rather have it back. Well, that caught my attention too. And then when you look at the rise of the Belt Road Initiative, a growing group of countries that right now is nearly 75% of human population, 50% of global GDP and growing. Well, that's something that caught my attention. And that's what led me on to the BRICS. And when I started down this pathway, I never thought that this was what it would turn out to be. But the growing coalition that we see in the BRICS, in the Belt Road, in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, in the Eurasian Economic Union, which are all the same countries, and they all have the same agenda, and that is to push back against the 500-year Western dominance. The Western hegemony has been going on for 500 years as far as these countries are looking at it. And they've never had a chance to stand up to the West. They've never had the military might or the GDP or the wealth or the sophistication, but they do now, and they're finding safety in numbers. And the growing coalition, which is also very concerning, if you look at the countries that are joining on to these unions, most of them are incredibly resource rich, and many of them have been underutilized, and that's China. And these countries are going in a cooperative manner instead of a coercive manner, and they're industrializing these countries. They're building roads and bridges and maritime channels. They're cooperating and building gold and silver mines and oil refineries and taking a piece of it, yes, in a cooperative manner. That's what cooperation and mutual benefit is. But they're industrializing these countries and bringing the middle class to the forefront as ours are disappearing. And so when we've talked about the fact that in just a span of 2 years, Saudi Arabia, not only along with all the OPEC countries, have joined the Belt Road Initiative, and that's a big one. If all of the OPEC countries are on the Belt Road and we're not, is that a problem? Well, kind of seems that way to me. And we've seen them join the BRICS. We've seen them join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We've seen them tell people in Davos that they're open to taking other currency for oil. And we talked last week about MSN publishing an article that was written on another site that's becoming harder and harder to find, that the United Arab Emirates has told the world that they don't want to take dollars for oil anymore. Now, it's an interesting timeline here because this was 2 days before they invited delegates from 200 countries to Dubai to speak on a United Nations summit on climate control or climate problems, whatever. And, it's interesting that the man presiding over the conference was the chairman of the United Arab Emirates state-owned oil company. And he's presiding over it. And 2 days before they invite everyone there, he says, by the way, the United Arab Emirates doesn't want to take dollars for oil anymore. Now, as provocative as that is, it's not Saudi Arabia and it's not the rest of OPEC. But as I've talked about at length, again, over and over and over, beating a dead horse, and because these are the things that matter to me, logarithmic decay. And that's little by little by little, they bang, all at once, we start to see things happening. And if you don't notice the acceleration of the little by little by little by little by little of all of these deals that are being struck around the world in local currencies. Now, along the way, Jim Rickards, a very, very smart man, a very connected man, said they were going to issue a common backed currency pegged to commodities. And he said that this would happen in August. Now, the Russian finance minister's last name's Lavrov. Lavrov, I think. He talked about that this will happen. He's been saying it for 2 years, that this would happen and will happen. And look, they weren't ready to do it, right? They went back to the drawing board, and they were tasked with the finance ministers with coming back to the next meeting, which is in Russia, and presenting their findings for a common settlement currency. But the promise that was made is that all of these countries would start doing deals amongst themselves in local currencies to reduce their dependence on the dollar. And everywhere you look, you see it everywhere. All of the BRICS countries are trading with one another in their local currencies, from not just oil and natural gas, but you're looking at Brazil, the second largest exporter of corn in the world, trading with China for yuan, and the same thing with soybeans. And look at the decrease in soybean business that the United States farmers have this year with China, with big buyer of soybeans, because they're now doing it with another country in another currency. And, you know, Brazil, a charter member of the BRICS, just applied for OPEC. So all of these things are converging at the same time. At the same time that this all happened, we see Putin, who hasn't left the country more than once or twice in the last couple of years because he's got, you know, a bounty on his head from the West. He flies to the United Arab Emirates, flanked by 4 Russian fighter jets. And we still don't know why he was there. It was an unannounced, very impromptu meeting, and then went directly to Saudi Arabia after that. So is there a coincidence? At the same time, OPEC comes out and says, we're going to decrease oil production by 2 million barrels a day. Do you see the little by little pushing back against the 500 years of Western domination, the collective West, as they call it, the collective West being not just the United States, but before that, you know, the United Kingdom and all of the countries in Europe that at one point or another ruled the roost. And this is what this is all about. This is about countries standing up, finding safety in numbers. It is about a coalition of countries that are resource rich. And as Oltan Pozar has told us, this new system that we're heading into, Dunnigan, is one based on commodities, not upon debt instruments that are opaque and promises and coercion, but of cooperation and of a growing unity of countries pushing back against this hegemony. And all of the ones that are being admitted are resource rich. Now, there are 40 other countries right now that have expressed interest. 20 have applied formally. And the list of those that have applied formally, I just read something the other day, and I don't have them here with me as I'm not home, but every single one of them, they're all resource rich. And so this is a deal where these countries that are joining on will have what would be needed to fund or to build a war chest of that is substantial and that can, you know, that's not based on promises, that's transparent. And I believe we will see a marriage between blockchain technology, between the only other tier 1 asset in the world, gold, and these countries who will use a new settlement currency for energy, which will create that moment, that moment that maybe Klaus Schwab talked about, that reset moment where dollars are no longer needed, where for 50 years, we've created a synthetic demand by protecting the Saudi kingdom, which isn't being protected by us, evidently, alone anymore, as not only has Saudi Arabia signed an agreement with Russia for protection the day we left Afghanistan in 2021. I don't have to tell you how embarrassing that was, but at the same time, they're being protected by 2 of the 3 largest nuclear arsenals on the planet, with the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization with Russia and China. So this is not only growing legitimacy in terms of oil and energy, but also in terms of human population, in terms of GDP and military might. And all of these things, either they are coincidental or they're not. And what really tips the scales for me is Jared Bernstein, the lead economic advisor to the White House, whose main thesis is to lose the reserve status of the dollar, as it is a privilege we can no longer afford, and has written all sorts of reports about this that were picked up in the New York Times and the Washington Post, the most famous being Dethrone King Dollar. So what do? You weaponize the dollar, check. You tell the linchpin of the dollar hegemony, Saudi Arabia, hey guys, thanks for the memories, but we are going green. And we sign an executive order to attest to that by 2030, 50%, by 2080, or by 2050, 80%. We're going to these meetings, the United Arab Emirates, saying that this is what we're going to do, and laughed at by the head of the state-owned oil company, who says, you know, if we do this, we're going back to the caves. So this is a situation where, you know, either it's wickedly coincidental, or as my good buddy, our mutual friend, Bill Holter, says, it's just too stupid to be stupid. So that would be kind of the linear progression of events going all the way back for the last 3 years that we've been talking to where we are today. And the rest, I guess, will unfold. It'll be fun to see it through with you.
Well, fun might be with the quotation marks around it, as you've said, the Chinese curse about living in interesting times, because it seems that a lot of the assumptions we've been able to make since we were children or learning what eighth grade civics about the Bill of Rights, about privacy, about property rights, about whatever representative government and that sort of constitution, et cetera, go on down the list. The Second Amendment are all up in the air. They are being suspended at a moment's notice and without notice. My wife just read me an article that just came out today saying that dozens of major pharmacies had released all kinds of people's private medical information to the FBI with no subpoena, no cause, no notification, etc. So everywhere that we assumed that there was either privacy or property rights or whatever seems to be up for question.
And to me, that's worse than all of this. Donegan, I said, when you and I first started doing this, that the censorship, not being able to say the name of the virus or to say the president's son or any of these things where you get stripped of your channel was to me more frightening than the pandemic that I knew at some point would pass. And, these things are not just centered around what's happening offshore. You have a massive divisiveness in this country. We're not a united country like we once were. You have civil unrest all through the big cities. You have open borders. You have the FBI saying that the red lights are flashing, that the homegrown terror cells, it's just a matter of when, it's not if. You have all of this stuff happening when we have 65% of America paycheck to paycheck, 45% earning over $100,000 a year, paycheck to paycheck. You have record student debt, which, by the way, at 1.6 trillion is the largest asset of this insolvent and broke United States. Record credit card debt of over $1 trillion, record mortgage debt, record every kind of debt, record low savings. And then you have divisiveness between all sorts of ideologies and races and religions and all of these things that this country, you're labeled by who you voted for or who you think of voting for in the next election, not about who you are or what you're all about. And that to me is more frightening, but that's the divide and conquer part of the Communist Manifesto. I'm not saying that's where we're going, but when you look at the things that the United States have rallied from with their backs against the wall, going back hundreds of years, we were united, these United States, but we're not anymore. And in fact, it's actually very concerning. And where I read an article by a small college in Virginia published an article that basically said 54%, somewhere in that neighborhood, of Democrats believed that violence was acceptable to get their point across, and about 47% of Republicans said the same thing. I mean, come on, where are we? And I think that to me only makes the probable outcome of this stuff better. And then you throw into it the massive over leveraged unfunded banks, and no one knows what a bail-in is. Of course, your people do, people I talk to do. But people I talk to in daily life every day, none of them know what it is. It's unbelievable. And here again, just this last week, another almost 300 billion, or in the last 6 weeks, roughly 300 billion in outflows, 80 or 90 billion this last week, coming out of the banks, going into the money market accounts. The banks are rapidly losing their deposits, getting more and more leveraged and fragile. The whole system is teetering. And when you have $120 billion that needs to be paid back to this emergency bailout program, in essence, that the Fed created in March. And so if I were a betting man, I would say, there's a high probability we see more big bank failures in March or in April, which all it will take would be one bank to be bailed in for the whole public to wake up to a reality they have no ideas coming at them. And then what happens? And then that triggers a run on the banks, and it just feeds on itself as these banks are forced to liquidate their underwater 10-year treasuries to meet redemptions because they don't have virtually anything in reserves. That was something that the president said, you don't need to maintain any reserves during the pandemic. You can go to zero. So all the money you put into the bank, it ain't there. They take it and they either lend it out at a higher rate than they're paying you, or they buy treasuries. Well, all those treasuries are underwater that were purchased over the last 3 years. And if the banks have to meet redemptions, well, they have to sell their treasuries. And that's what put Silicon Valley Bank out of business in 36 hours. Well, we're not out of the woods, not even by a huge measure. All of these things put together make everything I see out there that much more real and that much more concerning. And then you look at the number two advisor, Lael Brainerd, modern monetary theorist, wants to get rid of the banks, wants to issue central bank digital currency. Oh, that's right. The BIS Well, they said everyone has to have one by 2025. And well, President Biden signed that into executive order too. And Lael Brainerd worked with MIT in development of this. I mean, is it coincidental? Are all these things lining up in a manner that is purely coincidental? So yes, I am fully guilty of saying the same thing over and over and over again. And when I started talking with you, we called it a linear progression of events. And go back like I just did and tie these things together and then say, holy crud, yeah. I mean, it's one heck of a progression that all seems to be linked together. And, you know, some of it you can't make up. As Bill Holter says, is it too stupid to be stupid? Maybe it is. Maybe I'm just trying to find a narrative where there isn't. Or maybe this is preordained. I guess only time will tell. I'm in the minority talking about this. I'm the only one talking about Lael Brainerd and Jared Bernstein. Maybe I'm not onto something. Maybe I'm on something. I don't know. But all I can tell you is that it's what I believe in my gut, in my soul. And I don't mind telling people. I'm out there on a limb doing it. So happy to take questions. I'm out here flapping in the breeze. You know, I've done it for this long already. So only time will tell. But it's all only with the best intentions that I say this stuff. And I say it to people I care about who have no understanding of this here in my life. And I bet most of them walk away saying, oh my God, why did I even bring that up with him? So you know, it's cathartic for me to do this, to talk to you, to talk to this computer screen, to talk to all you out there, because at least you have an open mind and are willing to think outside the box. Because unfortunately, most of America is stuffed tight into that box that is really easy to push over when the rest of us have the courage to do something that is unconventional. But you know what? Unconventional times call for unconventional measures and unconventional thought. And well, that's where we are.
It's interesting that you mentioned the March-April timeframe coming up here in about 4 months from now, because I just did an interview today with Michael Pinto, active money manager, widely followed. He used to be all over mainstream media until he said some not okay things to the mainstream about the counterfeiting being, you know, illegal, what unconstitutional, what the Fed actually does, et cetera. But he got disinvited to mainstream media several years ago, but he's been on independent media since. And he mentioned the same thing today, that he watches forward indicators. He watches the balance that's being drained and drained and drained from the special emergency facility that the Fed set up to make sure that banks who were suffering with those underwater bonds that they had purchased at low interest rates, which had, you know, crashed when interest rates had risen, got face value, you know, par value for them. Don't we all wish that when we made the wrong bet, we could just get just wiped clean on our balance sheet, et cetera, in our personal level? But that doesn't happen at the household level. That happens only to the biggest, too big to fail. But he said that that fund is going to run dry by end of first quarter, roughly March, April. He also talked about commercial loans, and you've talked to us about that in the past. They're going to come due for rescheduling, and they have to be re-upped. And that'll be a much higher rates for these zombie companies. 40% of the companies in the Russell 2000 having no earnings, can't even make their debt payments without raising new debt all the time, and that's going to be much higher rates, et cetera. So it looks like a big storm is brewing. It's going to come to a head likely at the end of first quarter, beginning of second quarter. It's interesting that you named that same time frame in your assessment just now. I think, you know, great minds may be looking at different pieces of the puzzle, but they're all kind of like a lens focusing down in that same trouble spot approaching.
Well, I'm a big fan of Michael, and I try to catch everything he does, certainly with you and others. He's a heck of an analyst, and I think he's fantastic. And here again, looking what Al Gore says, you know, that's the thing that just sucks, that you can't have differing opinions. And you would think that anyone with journalistic integrity or any real media outlet would want that. But who owns 70% of those leases and loans? The regional banks, 70%. And the small business loans. So as all these unwind and people go bankrupt, who gets stuck holding the bag? Oh yeah, it's the banks that are underwater already. Not a good thing.
The other thing we talked about with Michael Pinto was the chilling pre-announcement of an upcoming cyber attack that's supposedly going to disable not only the banks, the stock markets, but also things like water supplies, electrical grid, dams, et cetera, et cetera. And the last time we had a major pre-announcement of a thing, it was about a pandemic. That was announced before it happened. And then recently we were told, oh, there's going to be another one. It's going to be much more deadly than the first one. It's like to an ordinary person in the cheap seats, it's very concerning when you can have pre-announcements about upcoming disasters that are going to affect the entire global population and need global solutions, which are usually all planned out ahead of time and usually involve sweeping shutdowns of any kind of constitutional freedoms, privacy. It usually involves imposition of restrictions on travel, restrictions on contact tracing, and all kinds of things like that. So it's very concerning that we're getting a pre-announcement of big upset to come, perhaps. And when you mentioned these progression of events that are leading inexorably to a conclusion, it reminds me of a time that I interviewed our good friend Rob Kirby, God rest his soul, when he talked about the Western financial leaders, that those in power of the Western financial system are really cornered. They simply have painted themselves into a corner where there is no escape. You can't, by lowering interest rates or raising interest rates or devaluing currency or whatever, you can't escape from this debt trap that's been built as mathematically certain is going to cause a huge failure. But as you pointed out, you can always come up with someone to blame it on. You can, rather than taking responsibility and say, yeah, we did this. We've been fleecing y'all for generations, from your grandparents to your parents to you. We've been stealing your savings, your retirements, your earnings, and now it's going to blow up. Rather than admitting that, they're saying, oh, look, it might be a state-sponsored terror attack. As a cyber thing's going to shut everything down.
Inflate, default, or option three. No one ever talks about find a villain. But remember last week I mentioned something from the head of the Polish central bank. His name is Adam Lipinski. And if I'm not mistaken, Poland is number 2 this year behind China in most gold accumulated, and which is kind of strange. That sticks out. But his quote, I read it last week, was something to the extent of, we buy gold because when someone shuts off the power to the financial system that's all digital, we own gold as a backup to that. I mean, it's almost verbatim of that, where he's saying just that there will come a time where this electrical financial system shuts off somehow in a cyber attack or whatnot. And that's exactly what he says. And that's why they're stockpiling on gold. Is it an eerie coincidence? I don't know. There's a movie right now that I watched with my wife the other night, and it's on Netflix. It's with Julia Roberts and Kevin Bacon, and that's what happens. There's a massive cyber attack, and everyone's in the dark, and it's very frightening to watch what happens. And the civil unrest, well, put that in the context with all of the civil unrest we already see, with the lawlessness, and wake up to no food stamps, welfare payments, entitlements, and all your money on the bank is gone and the banks are boarded up. And what do? I mean, could that happen? Look, I mean, I'm not a doom and gloomer, but you start to think about these things and how fragile the system really is. I mean, everything now is on the web. From your life to your security at your home, your door locks, your alarm system, your Ring camera, everything. And your money, and that's one of the reasons that gold and silver, which have no counterparty risk if they're in your own possession, would be something that you'd be foolish to not want to at least think about if you understand the possibility of something like that happening. And so, yeah, it's frightening as hell, actually, when you say that, when there's an announcement, when Adam Lipinski says this, and when you take a step back and say, geez, turn your power off for as Bill Holter always says. He says, you want to see what it's like, go home and shut your power off. And for a day, see if you can live with no power, no electricity, no air conditioning, no cell phones, nothing, and see how far you get. And you realize just how dependent we really are, and how much of a potential issue that could possibly be.
We wanted to follow up with some viewer questions that have been posted on some of the topics that you touched on regarding the UAE dumping the US dollar. It was curious that it was posted by MSN and it was written by a different news outlet, not MSN. And then you can't find, it's very difficult. I wasn't able to find in several attempts to find other major outlets carrying that story. Makes you wonder, because this is a big deal. In the past, whenever countries, whether it's Libya or Iraq or others, had announced that they were going to be doing deals with oil outside the petrodollar system, there was a regime change that happened shortly after that. And coincidence or not, it seemed to be something that was just verboten. And yet it seems to be now, the story is out there, that UAE is making this declaration. Sarge 27271 asks, how long before the rest of, I assume he means like OPEC or other oil producing nations, do the same, in Andy's opinion?
I think it will happen. I mean, look, there could be an event that would trigger these countries to do this, but look, when you have right now 11 countries in the BRICS, there were 12, but evidently Argentina is staying out right now with their new regime, and 20 that have formally applied and another 20 that want to. In cryptocurrency, they always talk about mass adoption. I think it's the same thing here. You need a mass adoption of countries. The difference between the West and the East is that the question that Sarge is asking is one we all want to know. And instant gratification in this country is not fast enough. And, people get a lot of crap for saying things online that don't materialize immediately. And I'm not saying this, directing this at him, but what I'm saying is that I believe that's exactly why maybe they had intentions or aspirations of issuing some form of a common settlement currency in August, but realize that, hey, if we're going to do this, let's do it the right way. You get one shot, you get one swing, and if you don't knock them out, well, he's going to come at you hard. And so I think they are building a coalition that will be very hard to challenge once it happens. Now, maybe there will be an event here with the banks or with the dollar or whatever that precipitates it, but I would say probably longer than most people will want to see, those that believe this is happening, in terms of seeing it play out. I don't think any of us want to see this, but I just think it will happen in a manner. It will happen on a Monday morning, Sunday night. We'll wake up to a new reality, and it will happen at a point when they're in a position to stand up to anything the West wants to throw its way. And is it a coincidence that Putin, who hasn't left the country, makes an impromptu trip flanked by 4 Russian fighter jets to the UAE before he goes to Saudi Arabia in an unannounced trip? Could it be that is what this is about? Hey, we got you, or who knows? I don't know. And then he goes to Saudi Arabia, and then they announce a 2 million barrel reduction in output. Could it be coincidental? I don't know. But again, all of these things that, Rick Rule often says, we live in a world of probabilities, not guarantees. And I agree. I would say the probability of this happening grows by the day. The time frame, again, will be impossible. I think anyone who issues a time frame is guessing, and I think it diminishes the credibility of the statement. My statement is, okay, fine. What does Occam's razor say? The most logical explanation prevails. Look at all of these things happening. It's leading somewhere. That somewhere, to me, is a new currency that will be taken for oil. I mean, look at it this way also. Part of the petro deal that was struck was that not only will they sell oil for dollars, which has created a synthetic demand world over, but that OPEC would take those dollars and recycle them into U.S. treasuries. How's that done for them in the last few years? So they're getting crushed on their treasuries. They're getting inflated away by up to 10% a year. If you look at what John Williams would say, 7 to 10% per year or more. And then the country that's doing that is supposedly the petrodollar protecting us. Well, there are other people doing that now. And then they sign an executive order to go green. So all of these things are leading somewhere. So the probability that it happens, I believe, is close to 100%. When it happens, or what precipitates it, or what is the follow-up immediately after, I don't know. Use your mind's eye. I wish I could be more specific. If I had to guess, it would coincide with some form of real dilemma here in the United States, where, look, if the Fed all of a sudden starts to pivot and print again and destroy the value of the dollar, what is the incentive for holding a depreciating currency and then recycling it into treasuries that are, for the first time in 45 years, more volatile than gold? Why? And I think that's what is happening here. So they're plotting, and they're going to do it the right way. They're not going to shotgun it and say, oh, crap, we screwed up. Now let's go back the way it was. No, once you cross that line, there's no coming back. So they're going to do it with a very large substantial mass of everything that you would need to make it work. So who knows, a year, 2, 6 days, don't know, but it's coming.
Related question here from Gerald Lee, talking about countries that reach a crisis where their currency devalues. He says, how fast is a devaluation? Is it instant like in Argentina? Is it overnight?
Well, I mean, you go back to like Weimar Republic, people would get paid, and they, before it started happening, they would run to the store to spend their money. Now money transfers like that, it would happen very quickly if it's a coordinated effort. You see, a lot of people talk about hyperinflation and devaluation of a currency being an increase in the money supply. That is traditional measurement of inflation. But when you realize it doesn't have to be printed, because there's way more dollars, both physical $100 bills and also the digital, the euro dollars, they're called, outside the country, because everyone's had to stockpile them to buy energy. So it would be a dumping of dollars, sending them all to home. No one wants them anymore. The issuer has to soak them up, and it would happen very, very quickly. In order, I don't think it would be anything in an orderly fashion. And yes, you would see it happen very, very, very quickly if the world was dumping dollars in that manner. So look, you could argue that this has been happening very slowly, precipitously, for 100 years. And, you know, the dollar's worth a penny or 10 cents of what it was worth. But when there is no more synthetic demand for a currency that has no backing, where so many currency units have been created over the last few years, it would be something that I think would overwhelm this country very, very quickly.
I just had a little anecdote that reminded me today. I was walking into, and you can relate to this, a Publix grocery store, and outside they were selling Christmas trees, and the range of prices went up to $120 for different, depending which Christmas tree you wanted to get. When I was a kid, my dad took me to the YMCA Christmas lot, and they went from $3 to $12. So, you know, when you're watching the currency get destroyed in front of your eyes, it's hard to ask the question, when does the devaluation start? Because it's just been, the river that we're living in has been devaluation our entire lifetime, for generations here.
We took in $4.4 trillion in tax revenue last year, but the deficit, or the spending, was roughly $6.3 trillion. And I was looking at something, you know, in 2024, the spending is projected to go to 6.8, 7. These are the government's own numbers: 7.1 in 2025 and 10 trillion by 2023. And none of these estimates factor in anything, you know, possibility of any event. So in their own statement, that's exactly what they said. And Simon Black does a great job of showing this, and had a link directly to the US government's page. And, you know, the debt is growing so rapidly that by 2031, which is what, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years away, the Congressional Budget Office says the interest on the debt plus mandatory entitlement spending, like Social Security, which is 70 plus trillion in debt, will consume 100% of the federal tax revenue. So in 7 years, everything, including the military, anything discretionary, including military, will have to be borrowed. So ask yourself, how is it that the United States can continue to be the dominant economic and political power and military power around the world when the government has to borrow money just to fund its military and keep its lights on? And that's 7 years away. So, you know, you tell me, how close are we to it? This is why these countries are fine. This is the rallying cry. This plus the coercion and the sanctions and the bullying. But the glue that will make it work will be pegging a new currency to something like gold, which is the only other tier 1 asset, which all the countries are buying and repatriating. Wonder why? And using blockchain technology to show the veracity of it. So everyone in all of these different countries know where they stand on one common blockchain that everyone across the globe can see and have it audited independently. And look, you got something that will immediately have greater credibility than a country who's lost credibility in the world's eyes on many levels, including election questions and including, justice and the equal application. But all of these things, people say, who will trust China? Well, who trusts us right now? So, excuse me, it goes both ways.
Right. And you've talked to us several times in the past about accumulation of gold by central banks around the world. And there's a question here from Jack B. Are any central banks accumulating silver?
Yes. As a matter of fact, there is who was it? Turkey. I know. Excuse me. Turkey bought record amount of gold so far this year, and they're up year to date to somewhere around 6 million ounces, about 190 tons. And I saw that they just imported a record amount of silver, about 32 million ounces, almost 1,000 tons, which would be 32,150,000 or whatever. But they have recently, and this was just this year so far, they've got 32 million ounces, and in October, um, in October, who imported 60 million ounces of silver? It was, I want to say Turkey. No, Turkey. No, I just said Turkey. Someone imported 60 million ounces of silver in October. I know China imported 10 million in October, and in India imported 60 million ounces of silver in October, and 304 million last year. That's more than that's on COMEX. So yes, they are importing it. It's just not getting the attention that gold is. But that's no small potatoes. In the last year and a half, India has bought 360 million ounces of silver. And so you got Turkey and China and India. Well, Turkey just is one of the countries of the 20 that is applying to the BRICS. And so they're buying massive amounts of gold and silver. They're striking deals with Russia and with Saudi Arabia and with China. And they are now one of the 20 countries that is applying to BRICS formally.
I'm going to read the next question while you get some water. There you go. Mike P. asked, now you've talked to us several times in the past about imbalance of supply and demand coming out of the U.S. Mint for some of their flagship products, such as the American Silver Eagle, et cetera. And there's been shortages from time to time. Sometimes it makes no sense what's going on when the demand is off the charts and their charter says they have to keep up with demand, and then they're producing like 30-40% what they produce in an ordinary year. There's a question here, and you've talked to us also and educated us somehow that not everybody is a primary dealer from the U.S. Mint, that there are only certain authorized resellers, et cetera. Mike P. says, can Andy comment on the illiquidity at some of the primary dealers?
I can't comment about them. I have no idea their balance sheets, but there's only 6 or 7 of them, and they're massive companies. I would think that as money is becoming more expensive, some of these primary dealers may have issues. I mean, this is not a problem where it only is affecting the smaller businesses. Look, if you have obligations, these primary dealers, as an example, they'll buy, let's say 50, 75, $100 million, whatever it is, from not just the US Mint, from the Royal Canadian Mint, from the Australian Mint, the United Kingdom Mint, from the South African Mint, and various refineries, and they have big obligations. And so could it happen? Sure. Evidently, I think it probably will happen to some of them, but no, I can't comment. I don't know of it being an issue. It's never been an issue that I know of. But look, everything that we talk about in terms of the demand that we've seen over the last several years has come at a zero federal funds rate, where the cost of money was so easy that going out on a limb, like I often said, during the pandemic, I went out on our line of credit and added to our already big inventory and said, whatever I can, let's do it, because money was very cheap, but it ain't anymore. And now you better think twice about it, with rates rising and banks less willing and more reluctant to sell, to extend credit rather. It could become a problem. That's a thought-provoking question. I don't see it as a problem yet, but again, the people who are watching this show and who we talk to every day are the pimple on the elephant's rear end. When the elephant says, I want gold and silver now, well, yeah, you're going to see all sorts of issues, and you could see those kind of issues as well. So yeah, that's why reluctantly preparing, as the name of your show used to be, everyone has to do it, even if it's reluctant. And no one wants to confront these realities. I get it. I applaud those that have an open enough mind to do, but yeah, liquidity problems, I think, will not be immune to even the biggest players, potentially. It's a good question.
But those who have been accumulating for some time, or depending where they live, they may not feel that it's safe to store a significant amount of wealth right where they live, because they don't feel like they can be there to protect it, or they're about to move to a new location and they just don't want to have to carry this stuff with them. Whatever the reason is, that some people opt for vault storage for part or all of their gold and silver. There's a question here from TK who says, if gold and silver were going to go to 100x, would the storage fees do the same?
Well, with every facility out there, yes. We have the only fixed rate program that I know of in North America. We have that exclusive deal with BRICS where we have a fixed rate. Now, the contract does say if it goes over a certain price way up there for an extended period of time, we can readjust it. We wouldn't readjust it the way everyone else is. Everyone else does it on a variable rate. And the variable rate basically says that it's a percentage of the asset value that you're paying for insurance, and the insurance is probably the biggest cost component of a storage facility outside of brick and mortar. And so if the price goes 100x, the cost of insurance did, and you could see real issues with insurance in that environment, and especially with claims or whatnot. But living down here in Florida, I understand what happens with insurance companies and claims and lots of them. And there has been a lot where getting home insurance here is very difficult because of it. Well, you start seeing losses, UPS losses, Brinks losses, whatever it may be. Who knows? Going way down that road as prices get way, way high. But yeah, with every other facility, it is a percentage of asset value. If you're paying 40 basis points on X and X goes up 100 times, well, so too does what you're paying 40 basis points again. So it would, yes. But
right.
One other thing, all of these contracts, just about every one that I've ever seen, it's the monthly average price. So if gold spiked up to 10,000 an ounce for 2 days and came right back down, you wouldn't even notice a difference on your statement. But if it stayed up there, you would. So at that point, you got a couple of days or weeks to make some pivoting and to make some choices and changes.
I just realized the half the hour went by, and I meant to ask you about the weekly specials because some of our viewers can't stay till the end of the hour. Hopefully they're still hanging around here. Can you talk to people quickly about what the weekly specials are before we move on back to more?
I'm never prepared for that, as usual. Let me look here. I'll tell you what they are. I believe I can do that relatively quickly, unless you have them already handy.
I don't have them queued up at the moment here.
Okay. Very sorry about that. All right, it looks like...
Not a worry. While you're looking that up, I was just going to thank everyone for being here. And folks, if you don't want to miss out on a single episode of our interviews with Andy or any of our other guests, and we've had a lot. We give Alistair McLeod, a retired former bank director, on our show, who's currently the head of research at Gold Money. We have Michael Pinto. I mentioned him as an active money manager. We have later this week, we're going to have a state senator within Missouri who is introducing a bill to enshrine gold and silver as legal tender status in Missouri. He's the senator who's putting forward that bill. Senator Bill Eigel. We're going to have him here later this week, so make sure you don't miss that. But if you don't want to miss anything on Liberty and Finance, make sure you go to libertyandfinance.com, put in your name, your email address, click submit. Make sure you confirm on the confirming email. You'll get one email in your inbox per day, and we won't share your email with anyone else. And it'll have our latest interviews and all our weekly specials. And Andy's going to let us know what our weekly special is.
Yeah, so we're still doing 2023 and also backdate Silver Eagles at $4.99 over spot. 1/10 ounce gold maple leafs, minimum 5 coins, $30 over melt value, and constitutional 90% junk silver dimes and quarters, $3 over spot. All really good prices compared to where they've been. And one of the things that I've talked a lot about is there are people who have bought bars, especially in IRAs over the last few years, because the Eagles were too expensive. It's something to think about. Trading those bars into Silver Eagles, you're going to lose silver. But if we see what we saw over the last several years, again, look, I mean, buying Silver Eagles, I was paying $12, $13 over spot to buy them back from the public not too long ago. And the same thing is true with the 90% silver. We were paying pretty darn close to that at some point, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 over spot to buy back from the public, and everything's come down, everything. So, something to think about for people who have bars that are like Missouri, passing law. These legal tender laws say that, this is not legal tender. That's a 10 ounce bar of silver that Kevin seems to have here sitting here fortuitously, but even a Morgan silver dollar like this, is because the law says any coin minted by a sovereign government, past or present. And most of the language reads the melt value plus market premium. So, look, you're seeing this grow, this resistance, call it, the American spirit, and I'm all for it. So that's fantastic that Missouri is doing that, along with a lot of other states that are as well. So the idea of owning coins instead of bars is something I've always preferred, but in good conscience, I couldn't recommend them for a good period of time from 2020 to 2023 because the premiums were too high. Was that an isolated anomaly, or is that a precursor to what we can expect to see as things accelerate? And I would side on that this is something we would expect to see, because what I see happening wakes up the public, because it will center around the one place that no one ever thought they'd have to worry about safety, and that's their local bank, their regional bank, or any of these banks that anyone's got money in. So yeah, I think that wakes up the public, and then when they realize that there are states that are saying, "Hey, it's legal tender," it's going to open some eyes. So it's something for people to consider, to think about. You can always call yourself, Dunnigan, or your staff, or any of us at Miles Franklin, if you have a broker already with us, that we're happy to help you with that as well.
Andy, you've talked to us in the past on your linear progression of events about a lot of major players in the world are de-risking and reducing counterparty risk. One of the ways they're doing that is by repatriating their gold. You mentioned just a few moments ago India, Turkey, and others, China, buying gold and silver hand over fist. But even like Germany and Poland and other countries have been repatriating, saying, we want our gold back within our own borders. We're not comfortable any longer having it stored in London or wherever it was being stored. For people who over a period of time may have stationed some of their gold or silver in foreign vaults, whether it's in Malaysia, Singapore, anywhere, and want now to have that repatriated back to the US, are there any techniques, any strategies that can be useful to getting stuff moved in an economical manner, perhaps not having to actually ship the metal directly, or having it bought back there and then buy it back here? Or what strategies should people consider if they want to repatriate their gold?
We can do that. And my business was founded on Swiss investments. So if people have Swiss accounts, we're very adept at bringing it back from Europe, Liechtenstein or Switzerland or the UK. We can have BRICS actually pick the metal up at the institution, and we're good at that. We have great relationship with BRICS Global Services, and there's BRICS facilities throughout Europe. When you talk about Singapore, it's really expensive. When you talk about Australia, it's really expensive. And when you talk about like the Perth Mint, most people who own gold in the Perth Mint own it in a certificate basis. They don't own it allocated. I've met 2 people in my whole career who actually pay the really high storage rate of over 1% for allocated gold. When you own the unallocated gold at Perth Mint, you first would have to have it allocated and get in line with everyone else, pay to have it allocated, and then shipped across the border. It's stupid expensive. In those instances, if the institutions do not have, and most wouldn't, a means by which to get it cross-border efficiently or economically, then the best way to do it would be to sell it and to repurchase it. But if it's in places, in Panama, we've had it picked up by BRICS, which is about as far as I've ever gone south to do this. But anywhere in Europe usually is not that big of a problem. But look, to me, this is why, having a Swiss annuity, as an example, in Switzerland, or a Swiss bank account, fine, great, or a managed account with privacy, even a safe deposit box. But having all your gold and silver there, when you need it, it's not easy to get it back. And I guess if that, at that rate, why not just own PSLV and PHYS and make it real easy for yourself and have your gold at home or nearby? Or, in our Canadian vault, I can have it back like that, or in any of our BRICS facilities. But when it's across oceans in a world that very quickly could become destabilized, you got to think about that. Here again, proactivity, not reactivity. You need to be proactive and not reactive. If this is on your mind, most of us go through life at some point or another, say, oh my God, I knew I should have done that. Damn it. Why didn't I? I was thinking about that forever. Well, that would be the one thing that I would say is very challenging. If it's anywhere besides Western Europe, it becomes an issue. So if you want it back, get working on it now, and we can help you. We do have a person, Miles Franklin Joel, who is very adept at working with BRICS and BRICS Global Services. We can get quotes for you. If people have metal in those places, we would need where it's stored, the address of the facility, best you can, and what you have, and we can get you a very, very accurate shipping quote from BRICS Global Services, if that's something people want to do. Now, I don't want to do this for the whole internet if people aren't really seriously doing it. BRICS won't like that. But if it is something you're considering doing and are serious about it, we would be happy to have BRICS do the legwork for us and give us a quote on sending your metal back physically by air in a very, very efficient manner.
I guess one thing we didn't mention today when you were talking about the strategy of a potential bar for U.S. Eagles or bar for junk silver swap, people who are planning on a strategic swap in the future, whether it's playing the gold silver ratio, and that normalizes buying silver now, swapping into gold later when gold becomes cheaper relative to silver, that kind of thing. There can be a place in that for vault storage that can make a lot of sense. And there is a vault that's co-located with one of our bullion operations hub in Fargo, North Dakota, that can make that really, really handy, convenient. Nothing has to actually ship, just rolls down the hall from our vault to the personal vault or back forth. So talk to one of our brokers. Go ahead and give us a call, guys, at 888-81-LIBERTY. If you have any strategies, if you're going to be moving and you don't want to take your stuff with you, you'd rather have it in vault storage. If you've accumulated so much that you're not comfortable having it all at your house, you'd like some of it for diversity reasons at another location, so that if, heaven forbid, some bad guys broke in or there was a natural disaster or something, not all your eggs would be in one basket, but you can still transact very, very quickly on it if need be. So we do have strategies for you. Give us a call. We can talk you through that. Well, Andy, we are out of time. It's always a shame when we have to say. I feel like Carol Burnett pulling on her earlobe here, saying it's.
I used to love that show.
All this time, no, everybody did, I think. But anyway,
my favorite was Tim Conway when he was the old man and he would shuffle, and I love that show. But I guess that just goes to show my age. So we have the DVDs if you ever want to watch it. We've got 2 more weeks before the end of the year. Done again. It's been a good one, and I look forward to doing these next 2 shows, and then seeing what I believe. I'll go on record as saying I think 2024 will be the craziest year in my career in terms of what we see, and I hope that crazy doesn't turn into be something that is not so pleasant. But with this election coming and the banks and all of the things that seem to be accelerating down this linear progression, I think it's going to be interesting times, as the Chinese curse says. May you live in interesting times, and boy, oh boy, these are pretty darn interesting. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you, and thank you everyone out there for spending time with us and listening to me ramble. It's cathartic for me. So
I would have had to have taken up half of our hour if I'd have read all the grateful comments about you personally at the beginning of this live stream. So just know that our community that are here, we've got over 1,100 people watching right now, and they deeply value the reason they're here. The reason they're spending this hour together with us is because they value the input that they receive and the mind sharing that they're getting here, as well as the ability to socialize about these topics that they care about with each other. So guys, you are what makes all this happen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of Liberty and Finance. Those of you who've been here since the very beginning in 2013, please take to heart what Andy's saying, his gut sense that he's sharing, that 2024 ahead is going to be a very bumpy road, perhaps volatile in many ways in our lives. So if you've been putting off any preparedness steps until now, time to get down to business and take care of business. So I get a lot of calls from people who are having major life events, and they're trying to make sure that they are not dependent solely on the banks, not dependent solely on the stock markets, the brokerages, etc. we'll have more to talk about that next time. And
one last thing
go ahead.
regarding people wanting to purchase by the end of the year. Remember, everything shuts down the last week in December. So you got basically just a few more days to a week before, between Christmas and New Year's, getting packages by UPS, it's difficult. So please keep that in mind. You're getting to the 12th hour already before getting packages, which will go into the new year. So I think it's important to mention that.
Good point. Good point. And always an option when you do place your order. There are upgraded shipping fees. We can do either next day or second day air if it's justified, and you can pay by wire if you want things to ship faster. So, but still, it's not a lot of fun trying to push the river. It's better to go with the flow and make it just happen smoothly. So, Andy, as always, thank you for joining us on Liberty and Finance. Thank you all.
Everyone
Thank you all for
well.
being here. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Again. See you, buddy.